Welcome to Buddha at the Gas Pump. My name is Rick Archer, and my guests this week are Puran and Susanna Bair. Welcome, Puran and Susanna.
Hi, Rick. How are you?
Good. It's good to see you both. I was very pleasantly surprised when I started to read your book, Follow Your Heart. Usually I don't have a chance to read the book of the person I'm going to interview until the week before I interview them. And so I didn't know what to expect, but immediately I thought, whoa, this is a very mature teaching, a very mature spiritual understanding. And so I didn't even get a chance to finish the book. I read about a third of it, but I really found it enjoyable as far as I got. And the reason
Thank you.
Yeah, and the reason I call it mature and the reason I enjoyed it is a reason for which I often get flack from people. And that is that, I often talk about there being stages of development and levels of experience and levels of understanding and so on and so forth. And people who have a sort of a conceptual understanding of non-duality don't like talk of stages and levels. They feel, well, it's one homogeneous wholeness, so therefore how could there be stages and levels? But experientially, practically speaking, one grows into the experience of that wholeness through stages, through phases. So, am I right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's how we see it. We even have a book about these stages. Our third book, Follow Your Heart, delineates the 9 steps that we identify in the spiritual path.
Well, that's the one I've been reading.
Oh, that's the one.
Follow Your Heart.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
We thought you were living. See, Rick, I just finished a tour, the Invincible Heart tour, which we might get into, and I was in Austin, and a good friend of ours, he just discovered unity consciousness. We are all one. And he said, if we are all one, we don't need stages of development. We are right there. Unity is right there with you. And I said, well, maybe in our innermost being, but in our everyday consciousness, we are far away from it. Most of us, the general everyday person, if that would be the case, we would have the golden age happening here, and I said that's what we are actually working toward. And I said there are a lot of different groups who work in their ways about it, and our work is working it from the heart. Teach applied meditation, because that's where you really can feel, and your life gives you feedback. That is the interesting thing. Life is a feedback system of where you are with your unity consciousness.
Right.
That's where it's at.
Yeah, I mean, if an understanding of unity were the same as the experience, then by the same token, an understanding of food would be the same as eating, and we'd solve world hunger. All you'd have to do is think of a vegetable, and you'd be content.
That's cool. That's cool. Yeah, today I think a lot of spiritual work is tied up in eating. Instead of practicing meditation. We just finished a 5-day retreat in the Berkshires in New Lebanon, New York, Massachusetts, exactly. And it was very interesting, how people start meditation and they like the idea of meditation, but very often just move out of it. That to go really deep into meditation, especially into the feeling parts, where you feel something, that's where people want to run and flee and move away from it. And that's what you do in our meditations, Rick. In our meditations, we move into feelings. So maybe we need to back up a little bit. I don't know, but...
I'd like to talk about that, actually. We were at the Non-Duality Conference in San Francisco recently.
And that's where we met you.
And where we met you. And I heard one of the speakers there say, if you're feeling emotion, you're not in unity consciousness, you're in duality. And I would beg to differ. I would say there is an emotion which is the emotion of unity. And we call that emotion peace. We say that peace is the white light, using that metaphor, of emotion. If you bring all the emotions together at the same time, in the same heart, you get a combination of all emotional experience, and that feels like peace. But peace is not the absence of emotion, as this lady was saying. It's rather the combination of all possible experience. That's how we see it. The Dalai Lama was here in Tucson a couple of years ago, and we got a chance to speak with him. And there was an assemblage of all different kinds of religions. The imam was here, and the leader of the Catholic diocese, and so on. There were all many, So we came as representatives of the heart, and the Dalai Lama was saying, well, his aspiration is to experience nothing, the nothingness, And we said our aspiration is to experience the wholeness, the everything. And he said, oh, it's the same. And I think it is the same at some level of abstraction, but the path to get there is very different. The path to get to nothingness is the path of monastic life, and the path to get to wholeness is the path of total life experience, and uses the heart.
And sometimes I think the very same thing can be experienced in different ways. There's a talk I heard one time in which Shunyavada, Purnavada was discussed, fullness of emptiness, fullness of fullness, and it was really with reference to the same thing, which according to one's orientation to it or cognition of it may seem empty, but perhaps upon closer examination or more intimate experience is found to be full.
Yeah, the same thing happens on an experiential level. When you close your eyes in the dark, it seems dark. It seems like there's no light. But as you look further into it, you see that you're surrounded by light. Mm-hmm. There's a light in the darkness. There is no darkness, actually. There's even light in the darkness, and there's sound in the silence, and so on. So it's a wonderful confusion.
So it's like you say. I mean, it might be that someone with a monastic orientation is attracted to the notion of nothingness, emptiness, but someone with a more householder orientation or worldly orientation is attracted more to fullness. I don't know. There are probably exceptions to those generalities, but
I like that, and I think I would say in general we should fight our proclivity. The people who are by nature attracted to the monastic life should get out of it and experience the wholeness, and the people that are so caught up in their busyness should experience the silence.
Well, there's, as the Ecclesiastes says, there's a time for everything. Turn. I have a friend here in town whom I interviewed, Francis Bennett. He's come for a visit, and he was a monastic for 30 years in Trappist and Benedictine monasteries. And while he was in there, he was also practicing Vipassana and Zen meditation very intensively. And a few years ago, he had this very profound awakening, profound non-dual realization, which stayed with him. And after about a year, he began to feel, it's time for me to leave. I should leave this monastery and go out in the world and do something. So, I wouldn't say that his 30 years were inappropriate or wasted in any way. That was fine. But at a certain stage of his development, it was no longer appropriate.
See, there's those stages again.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right. We go through stages. When we talk about these stages, Susanna likes to say there's the even-numbered and the odd-numbered steps. So we take one step in wisdom, another step in power, another step in wisdom, another step in power.
You want to say something about that, Susanna?
Well, I'm listening to the two of you, and I do fully agree. I think when I started meditation, when I started this meditative path, I had this strong experience, what you would call non-duality. I probably would call it something else, or maybe I haven't found a name for it yet. And I think that kept me on the path. That was such a powerful experience, but I did my path in life. We had children, and we had to work, and we had a mortgage. And you see, I do think it affects your life if you have a mortgage and if you have 5 children. We have no children together, but I have a former marriage, and when you have all this, and you don't run away and don't go to a monastery, because this is, Rick, what brought us on the path of the heart, and this is where we watch these steps, that there is a progress there. If you keep meditating, if you're applying meditation to your life, that I felt at periods of times, I was in a so-called uneven step. We call them the down steps. It goes deeper and deeper, and you have the feeling, oh my God, I make no progress. And then comes this successful up step. And so this is, and we actually think you have to go through 9 steps till you have the feeling you are finished, where you actually can contribute. I mean, this is what your friend would say, you know, I have to actually go out into life and do something. And this is where we talk about, you know, there is a purpose in life. There is something to do. And lots of times, you know, we have friends, they try to solve all their problems with food and yoga and colon cleansing and all this, and don't have a purpose. You know, don't have, I'm like, why are you cleansing your colon so much? Or why are you eating all this good food? You know, it's actually just, you know, and probably they would say, I need to heal, you know, I need to heal. But I think if one doesn't use anything else, you know, no inner processes, because I do think meditation actually creates a lot of chemistry inside of ourselves. You know, there's a lot of changes going on all different levels, you know, so you could call the mind, the emotions, the body, but you could call it too on the chemistry, on the hormones, you know, on the all different, and even on the, you know, microcosmic levels of our neurons and all this. That's where all the changes happen. So this is what we experienced, and so our diet is not clean, our exercise is not there every day, you know, and we travel a lot, we work odd hours, or way too much, you could say, and we feel very strong, healthy, and alive. And but we do feel these steps, you know, and we do have the ability to help people to guide through those steps, you know, because that's still a whole other level to the work, to be able to identify the steps within yourself, and then to know them so well that one can say, I can help you with those steps. I actually recognize, you know, in this retreat there was a young woman there, and I could say to her, you know, I actually know where you are, and in a way that's so comforting to somebody who listens to you, that you can say, I know these steps, I'm familiar with it, and I know how to help you through. And it's the question to create the trust.
I think everything seems to have its value in its appropriate context. You know, like you said, yoga, diet, exercise, all those things are of value. But sometimes people become obsessively reliant on one thing or another without the proper kind of, you know, balance of other things. Like, for instance, again, my friend Francis, he said, you know, he's been counseling a lot of people lately, and he said, you know, most of the people I talk to, they're just so obsessed about sort of like almost narcissistically indulgent about sort of little inner things going on with them. Most of them would do well to just get out and do some service, you know, go help people. That's it. You know, that would be the best technique for them.
That's it. That's why we stress the sense of purpose so much in our work, that the idea is to prepare oneself to be better able to serve. So the diet should serve service, you know.
Yeah, and I've gone through phases where I just was obsessive about my diet, you know, trying to eat only fruit or doing a lot of fasting.
You did that too?
Oh yeah, I like went a whole summer where I was fasting and eating nothing but fruit, and you know, and then I kind of rubber banded back in the other direction and was gorging on all kinds of foods, couldn't stop. But there was just this obsession with the body, which was out of balance.
I know what you mean. I had a diet a couple months ago. I was just eating the sun.
Really?
And that was really fun.
That'll burn your tongue.
That's right.
But
that's what keeps you eating other things.
It doesn't burn your eyes. So I would look at the sun for an hour a day, and I wouldn't have to eat.
Huh. Yeah, some people in my town have been doing that.
Yeah, it's a high. But then there's the social thing about, well, you know, people get together over food, and then there's the question of like, well, why does the body have all these wonderful sensations around taste and so on if we're not meant to eat?
Yeah.
So,
And could you have done that for years on end, or was it something you could do for a little while, but then you really need to get back to? We have physical bodies, and maybe we need to eat some physical food.
I think so. But it's really fascinating to know that we can sustain ourselves on light.
Mm-hmm.
It's fantastic to know.
Yeah. Now,
Well, that's who we are.
I don't know what it is about the Sufis. You guys are successors to Hazrat Inayat Khan and Pir Vilayat Khan in the lineage of Universal Sufism. And I don't know much about Sufism other than listening to Llewellyn Vaughan Lee, whom I think is brilliant, and you guys, reading your book. But it seems that it has a very deep mystical orientation. It's profoundly experiential, right down to the core of life. And as far as Sufi practices are concerned, all I've been aware of, and very tangentially, is the whirling thing. I really don't know much else about it. But you say that your primary practice is a meditation practice of some kind.
Of heart.
Of heart.
Your primary heart-centered. Mm-hmm. We like to pride ourselves that a lot of people talk about the heart and would like to have experiences of the heart, but we can do 40-day retreats on the heart. And, I had Buddhist monks come to my presentations and they say, I have been working for 30 years with the heart, but never listened to my heartbeat.
Huh.
And he said, by listening to your own personal physical heart and feeling that rhythm, it changes the whole game of it, because, as long as you imagine your heart, you have no pain. Do you see? So, and pain is such a powerful experience of the physical life. Just like how Puran says, why do we eat? We are all light beings, really. We can live off the sun, but that way we bypass the life on this physical life. And we didn't have a body before this life, and we won't have a body soon. When we leave this planet and this body, we won't have a body. I think we all agree that we will exist before and after. But what is this experience here in the physical body about? Do you see why are we here? What is this phenomenon that the one being is going through us, through each one of us? And how can we, through this physical life, contribute through the whole? Me as being the one, myself in this physical experience, as the one, how do I experience this and how do I contribute to the whole? I think those are the big esoteric questions in there. And we think by moving into the heart, and that is the signal that I am in the here and now. We have this judgment, I say it out loud, about other meditations, that when you leave your body, and you have to know our teacher taught us those kinds of meditation. It's not that we are not familiar with them. When we created our school, we changed the meditations because of those very reasons that I mentioned to you earlier, because of having children and mortgage and having to go to work and dealing with the stresses of the physical life. And the question is, how do you live a so-called spiritual life? How do you live the experience of the divine within myself and be totally available to the nitty-gritty, to changing diapers and all those kinds of great things. So I think that is the challenge.
So are you saying that your meditation practice involves literally listening to the heartbeat?
Yes. We're fascinated with this reality that the heart has a tangible signal that it gives as a homing beacon to draw us into it. We can tell when we're concentrating on the heart, when our attention is placed on the heart, we get feedback from that. I mean, you hear the heartbeat. Mm-hmm. And if we were to imagine our heart without that feedback, how would we know we're not focusing on our liver or our gallbladder or something? So the heart has a signal, and it draws you by going trying to intensify that signal, we're drawn right into it. It's a homing beacon.
You know, and once you experience it all the time. We speak here, I feel my heartbeat. And the heartbeat changes. You know, the heartbeat is not something that is all the time the same. And so it sort of regulates you. You know, like when I'm nervous and I feel my heartbeat, it speeds up, I can breathe differently, and I have influence on my heart. And my strength and my whole system starts working differently if I focus in on there. And you learn to do this like as a second nature, sort of. You see, so I can go speak publicly, and, you know, you feel the nerves, you feel the audience, and I change my breath, move it into the heart, and my heart starts radiating out. And before that, you know, I don't know how people do this who leave their body. And, you know, I haven't figured that one out, I guess.
What do you mean, people who leave their body?
Well, when you leave your body, you don't have that internal signal of the heartbeat.
Well, who leaves their body?
Let's get to that.
All the EOB people, right?
The what?
The experience of being out of body.
Like, you mean astral projection, that kind of thing?
Well, the original intention in the science of meditation was to experience what is death. Starting back at the Egyptians and leading into the Hinduism and Vedanta, the experience was, what is non-existence? What is it to be free of limitation? You know, the body is temporal, not eternal. It's fixed in location. It's not infinite. So the great appeal was, well, I want to be eternal and infinite, and then therefore I can't be limited to a body and a mind and so on. And that was the theme for thousands and thousands of years. I studied that method. I studied that method in my discipleship to Pir Vilayat, and I got to the point where I could stop my heartbeat, and I could produce delta brain waves, the brain waves of deep sleep. In fact, the experimenter who measured me said he found stronger delta waves in me than he sees in deep sleep, but I was awake at the same time. So I learned this method called Samadhi, which comes from Hinduism, which comes really from the Egyptians. And as I say, the motivation is to discover a non-personal reality, which is not limited. But 2,000 years ago or so, things started to change. And the shift was, let's experience what life is like. What's it like to be a human being instead of an angel? What's it like to really get into physicality? Is it possible to discover the universe in the person? See, and now today we call that the microcosm, that the whole universe exists as the macrocosm exists in the microcosm. But that's a relatively new idea in the history of meditation, and that's where we are now. And it turns out that the core of that is the heart. It's the heart that focuses the infinite into the finite.
I would acknowledge that people can use meditation to take refuge in the absolute or take refuge in samadhi to the exclusion of relative concerns. But if approached properly, samadhi is not necessarily an escape because it can be integrated into waking 24/7 experience. In other words, one can the range of one's experience can grow to encompass both the universal and the individual in one wholeness. And
Yes.
And so regarding the body, it's not something that you would want to escape from or that you could escape from. It's actually, as they say, the temple of the soul. It's the tool by virtue of which this whole journey can be undertaken.
Well, you're very modern in your thinking. This is good.
Okay, good. But I think the ancients, if properly interpreted, at least some of the ancients, had that same understanding. But it could be that those who became the custodians of their teachings distorted them in different ways, and who knows what we ended up with.
Well, Buddha taught there is no self even.
Right.
There's not even a self. So let alone thinking that the body is me. And in Hinduism, they say all the time, this is not my body, this is not my mind, right? This is not my ego, this is not myself. Well, whose is it? We'd say, no, this is me, and everything else is me too, right? So
Yeah.
as I say, it's the question of, are you looking for nothing or are you looking for everything?
The thing is, on some level, all these things are true, but there's always a bigger picture in which the opposite is also true, or there's a bigger picture which incorporates all these paradoxes into a larger truth.
That's right. But as we're charged with teaching people off the street, people that come to us that haven't meditated, and then people come to us that have meditated for decades.
TM people.
And people that have done vipassana and mindfulness and stuff for a long, long time, and they want the next step. And so, we need to understand how people get to unity. It doesn't just wake up. In fact, people who have said, well, I just woke up with a unity experience one day. I know a bunch of teachers like that.
That happens sometimes, yeah.
But it's not helpful as a teacher because,
right.
Then you're hoping that your students wake up on their own, right?
Yeah, it helps to have some systematic thing you can offer.
If you can see what the steps are and what the process is, how it changes at each step, then, maybe we can be helpful to lead people through it a little faster than just when they wake up in the bathtub.
No, absolutely. And sometimes these awakenings are just, the circumstances are just so coincidental. I mean, you might be eating tomato soup and you have an awakening, and it doesn't mean everyone should run out and start eating tomato soup. It just happened to be a coincidence.
Right, and also can one hold that state?
Right, that too.
So we identify 3 steps in that process. The first is, have you ever experienced awakening spontaneously? The next step is, can you trigger it to happen when you want? And the third step is, can you stay in that state as long as you want to stay in it?
And could there be a 4th step, that it's not a question of coming or going, but that state, if you want to call it a state, is so grounded, so rooted, that it becomes unshakable?
I find that everybody can act like a fool.
Yeah, true.
We have that ability. We can fall out of it at a moment if we want to. It's just that we have the ability, once we own that state, we have the ability to get back into it at will. But, we can get triggered and act like a child. It's just that we don't have to stay there and get stuck in it.
Yeah,
even Lance Armstrong can fall off his bicycle.
See, Rick, I find your discussions very interesting, and I think they are, they go really to the depths of, of the practitioner, and where the practice can go to. What interests me these days a lot, and this is, what I tried to address in my past tour with the Invincible Heart, is, I have the feeling there is, this evolution that one could say the one being is, or the whole universe, or the one is in. And I do think it looks like to me from the outer world and too from the inner world, how one experiences one's own inner stresses and the stresses of the collective, that there is a big shift going on.
I agree.
And what is on my heart very much is how to participate in that shift, in this awakening, in this new awakening of the whole, where it's on the one hand economically and political, but it's on the other hand too spiritual. And so in this tour that I did, it's not completely finished, I speak about the new hero, because each time has some individuals that come forth and help to lift the whole to a new place. And so I do actually think, I'm sort of bypassing here certain steps, I do think that in today's time, it won't be one human being that does it. It actually will be a collective, like a group of 100,000 people or even more. You see?
Have you heard that expression, the next Buddha is the Sangha?
There we go.
Yeah.
There we go. You see, and I find that spiritually very interesting, and you know, there are the different religions, and I have given up. You know, some spiritual teachers talk about the unity of unifying all the religions. I have given up on that a long time. But I do think that spiritual people have something else going on. You know, they don't see so much the boundaries and the belief systems. And my hope is that there is actually will something on that sort happen on that level, where we realize, you know, we all speak. I mean, you go to all different groups of spiritual schools, they speak about the one being, and maybe we could do something together to lift this universe to another level.
Yeah.
And so what, I have these 4 steps in there, you know, this being grateful and being vulnerable and create what you love and listen to the voice of your heart so that you feel guidance. And I really look to go to the people on the street. You know, one of my backgrounds is street theater. So I really like to go to the people out there. And this kind of 4 steps, it's like really, you can do these 4 steps without meditation. If you just want to get them fully developed, you need deep meditation. And what I found, what is the hardest step for people, believe it or not, this does not apply to people like you and, you know, people who decide to go to the monastery, but it applies to the everyday person on the street to create what you love.
That's the hardest thing?
That is the hardest thing for people. People don't know what they love. You know, what do they love to do? And people do not know. They are terribly afraid. Once they found out what they love to do, they are terribly afraid of doing that.
Huh.
Isn't that interesting?
It can be challenging. I mean, I love doing this, but I haven't fully transitioned to it. I still have a day job, you know.
But then you have figured out what you love to do.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And you have crossed the boundaries that you say, I'm doing this on a Saturday morning or whenever you do it. Right. I'm going to do this. So there's a strong commitment and an inner thing there. But a lot of people, you know, I think this is where I see the big shift happening, you know, because we're really coming out of eons of years of time of people being slaves.
Right.
See? And that is, I think, where the shift is.
Yeah, there's a...
See what I mean?
Have you seen the Thrive movie?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We love it.
Yeah. I'm going to interview those people in August, and as I recall, one of the points in the movie was that, you know, in a really more enlightened age, we wouldn't be working. You know, we would all just be doing what we love, and the technologies are there for all the energy we need and the food we need and all that stuff, or they could be there. And so, you know, imagine such a society, because, you know, think of all the literal and virtual slavery that has engaged the whole humanity for so many thousands of years. It's like, you know, rather primitive.
We're still into it, but we've accepted it. Somehow people accept the idea that a third of their income should go to their housing, or a half. Right? There's no reason for that. Most of that money goes to the bank. There's no reason for that kind of expense.
Yeah.
But you see,
it's the system that's at fault. And so I think this is an important point about spiritual work, is that spiritual work is not self-development. It starts with self-development, but it can't end there. It's not really about self-development. It's the universe developing itself through us. And we are each contributing to the awakening of the whole. Hazrat Inayat Khan, who we represent, has this saying, the aim of spiritual work today is the awakening of the consciousness of humanity to the divinity of the human being.
I love it.
It's not personal anymore. It's the whole being. The one being of humanity is waking up to its own divinity.
Yeah, and that actually harkens back to something we were talking about a few minutes ago when we were talking about samadhi and individuality and, you know, living as a person and so on. I mean, if you get right down to the real nitty-gritty, what are we? You know, we're that divine being which underlies and contains and gives rise to the whole universe. But we're each just sort of individual expressions of that, you know, like little villi, little sense organs. And that's waking up to itself through the instrumentality of me and you and each of us correct? Would you agree?
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. You've got it. That's it.
Yeah.
And there wouldn't have been that long ago that you would be tried for blasphemy and heresy.
Oh yeah, for saying such a thing. In fact, even now, when certain people hear someone say, "Oh, you are God," or "God is within you," and so on and so forth, they hear that as being a very egotistical statement, because what they think you're saying is your individuality is God. But what they're really saying is, obviously, your innermost being, your essence, that which ultimately you are, is that.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. And that is, you see, and that needs to be developed. And that's when people won't have a problem to do what they love to do. That's when you won't be clogged up with consumerism and with getting afraid when you're being laid off. I think it's so beautiful to see through the problem of in the outer world today where the development of the one is collectively. And I think this is actually where our work should be, to help that.
Yeah.
Do you see?
Yeah. Speaking of Llewellyn Vaughan Lee again, I mentioned him earlier. He just edited a book that was contributed to by Vandana Shiva and many other people, entitled Spiritual Ecology. And I haven't read it yet, but as I understand, the theme of it is that the ecological problem, which is very concerning, has as its ultimate solution spiritual development. And we could say the same of economic problems and this whole thing you're talking about with everyone having to work so hard and all that. And obviously most people don't see it that way. They kind of are just looking for technological solutions or political solutions. This party says we can solve it, and that party says we can solve it. But ultimately, without the spiritual foundation, there's no possibility of any kind of real solution.
That's right.
We heard Llewellyn Vaughan Lee's talk at that non-duality
Sand, yeah.
Don't.
and we were very disappointed.
How so? Now your wife is saying don't. Why were you disappointed?
He was expressing hopelessness. He said there's no point in human life anymore. It's senseless, and we can't make any meaningful contribution.
I remember that, but I'll have to listen to the talk again, because as I recall, he was saying it could go that way, but it doesn't have to go that way.
Well, he said it is that way now.
Oh yeah, it might seem dire. Personally, actually after his talk, and he also gave a talk with David Loy about ecology and so on, and I did a little interview later on that day with David Loy and Igor Kufiev, and we were talking about this. And the main theme that came out is that there's cause for optimism. That and Llewellyn is a deep person. I don't think he's gotten mired in pessimism. But if you don't have the appreciation of the spiritual upwelling that's taking place in the world, which you've been referring to, like there's this groundswell of, thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, then I think you could become very depressed, because what hope is there? The economy's going to hell in a handbasket, and the ecology and so on. But if you see this uprising taking place, and it's subtle, so you may not see it unless you're involved in it, then there's reason for optimism.
Lots of reason. This is an exciting time. This is the best possible time in the history of humanity to be awake, to be alive.
I agree. It's very exciting.
It's very exciting, and there's every reason for optimism. These people that's why I was so disappointed. Somebody who's a spiritual person should be just full of that vitality and excitement that this is it, and we're doing it, and we are it, and this is our time.
Yeah, I'm going to listen to that talk again, and maybe I'll give you my impressions of it. I have a recording of it. I could even send it to you, but we won't spend our time dwelling on Llewellyn. But anyway, the point we're making is that no one should despair. There's something very, very exciting taking place in the world, and it's not just the Arab Spring and people divulging government secrets and all. Those are just the tip of the iceberg. There's some there's some fundamental shift taking place, and the New Agers have been predicting for a long time, but we're kind of seeing how it's actually playing out.
I've been waiting for the revolution since the 60s, when I was very much involved in the peace movement. I was a hardcore revolutionist in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And then I became disillusioned with that movement because they didn't have a vision of what they wanted. They only knew what they didn't want.
Yeah.
At least the people I was hanging with. And so I from there I got into the lifestyle movement. You know, like what is a lifestyle that is prophetic today? How should we live? Can we make an example ourselves of a spiritually aware, ecologically sane lifestyle? Mm-hmm. And I spent 16 years in communes, having started several. And then I could see, well, it's not there either. It's really in the individual awakening of this ability to see the divine in life. Mm-hmm. With that, you need the heart. And I was meditating for decades on these very esoteric and very sort of far-out cosmic experiences, and I didn't have a heart. Mm. And now we focus entirely on the heart, and we see that's where the two worlds meet. The world that's invisible and the world that's material, the world that's universal and the world that's individual, they meet in the heart. Mm. And that's where you want to be, you know. Mm. So another guy that we have, that we take exception to is Deepak Chopra, who we listen to a lot of his talks, and he's talking about how reality exists in packets, and in between the packets there is nothingness.
But that's
like
quantum
digital,
physics, Puran.
Well, it's not quantum physics. It's Vedanta is what it is. There's nothing in quantum physics that requires that reality be turned on and off. So he talks about the on-off states of reality, and you want to get into the off state because that's where all the potential is. But the Sufis have never seen it that way. The Sufis have seen always a universe which is continuous. It's never off. See, but this gives such a fundamental direction to the spiritual work. If our intention is to get into the off state that exists between the on states, these very, very fine units of like reality, then we need to be non-existent as well. You know, and we need the monastic we need the monastic path.
Yeah.
But if you see the universe as continuous and always existing and never off, then our objective is to become everyone, everything, incorporate all, leave nothing out. And we find this very, very challenging because the first thing people want to leave out are all the things they call negative. Who wants to be negative? Who wants to have negative feelings?
Puran, I don't know what to say to you anymore.
Yeah.
What did you say? It's always fun interviewing a married couple. Well, let me comment on that. Deepak is an old buddy of mine. I taught his TM course when he learned to meditate, and lived with his parents for a couple of months in India. And I think where he's coming from, and I haven't seen him since he became famous, but I think where he's coming from in saying that it illustrates a principle, which is that you can take anything anybody says, just about, and you can understand it as true within a particular context. For instance, when you were making your first statement, Susanna said, well, that's quantum physics. Yeah, there are certain things that are true on the level of quantum mechanics that make no sense whatsoever on the level of Newtonian mechanics, Newtonian physics. And you can't interpose the two. You can't, take quantum mechanical laws and see them working on Newtonian levels of reality, and vice versa. So, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Each of these realities has its, and the trouble people get into, which is I think what you were alluding to, is that they sometimes take probably not the experience because it's probably too deep, but at least the understanding of a certain level of nature's functioning, and they kind of transpose that onto their relative life and try to live by it. And then that screws things up. For instance, you hear people saying, well, ultimately there is no self, therefore don't bother to do practices because it's only going to reinforce the notion of a practicer. And it's going to reinforce the notion of a self, which is ultimately false, and therefore you're making a mistake. So that's what they're doing. They're kind of mixing up levels. And I think that's what you're objecting to here.
Very nice.
Well, he objects to a lot of different things. What he wants to say is that we have very clear teachings, and these are the teachings of the heart. And So, you know, I do think that is actually the challenge with the different spiritual groups moving forward as one. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
In a way, that's what, according to me, the world would need. We would need more of this merging, because, you know, when I listen to you, I can feel and understand that you have different practices than I do, but we have the ability to talk so deeply that I actually have the feeling I agree with you. Mm-hmm. And when I talk with you, I have the feeling I could actually sit in the same room right next to you. I could do my practices and you could do yours, and we would feel good with each other.
Yeah. And I wouldn't for a second think that, well, your practice is inferior to mine. I've got the best practice, you know. In fact, I might want to try yours also, you know. And
yeah.
Although you don't want to try everything under the sun, because that becomes a hodgepodge. But you know how you were saying earlier about the unity of religions and how we're not going to achieve it by all religions becoming one. That's just not going to happen, because that's not the way nature is. I mean, if you go to the Amazonian rainforest, it's a very fertile ground, and you see all kinds of different foliage, and you wouldn't expect to see all plants the same. You know, there's this, this flower and that flower and this tree and that vine, so much diversity, and yet they're all very lush by virtue of how nutritious the soil is there. So we just need to sort of nourish the ground and let all these different expressions of spirituality flourish, and to each his own, and everyone's following their own path, but we're all on the same team.
That's right. That's right.
Very nice. Very nice.
Very beautiful.
Very nice.
And you know, if you don't stay with one practice, you never get very deep. If you go from one practice to the other, which some people do, you stay always on the surface.
Yep. Like, how are you going to find water? Dig 10 wells that are a foot deep, or one well that's 10 feet deep?
That's right.
Very nice.
That's
lovely. You've got wonderful metaphors.
I don't think I thought up any of them.
That's all right. You can recall them. That's the point. That's the value.
Yeah. So I think spiritual people or spiritual seekers have a lot to contribute these days to lifting the consciousness of the whole, or of the one. And I think that's a very important job.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
now I could ask you, I could take us on another line of discussion at the moment, but is there anything on either of your minds that you want to just sort of express right now?
Well, I would say that these different approaches that we're talking about, they do come through in the personality. Mm-hmm. And so if you make personality development a goal of the spiritual work, mm-hmm. then you see that the different paths lead to quite different personalities.
Yeah, true.
Because I have studied with teachers that were just incredibly confrontational and insulting. Mm. I mean, they had the feeling that if they just mowed you down, then of course you could grow up again as a proper being. We just have to destroy the ego as we have it, and so it can regenerate. Well, that's not our philosophy. I mean, and I think you feel that in a person. You feel it in hanging out with them and being with them. I mean, Susanna was talking about this retreat we just led. We ate with people. We ate in the same dining room. They rubbed shoulders with us. We had the same bathroom. We had the same shower. People would meet us in the communal shower room. I mean, that's unusual for a teacher, but we think that's really important. It's really important that we mingle at every level. That we be heart oriented rather than hierarchical oriented.
I'm not sure that I think that's important, but what was interesting, we do evaluation. The people thought that was important. Mm. And that was like, why is that important to you? And I do think what people struggle with, they said this literally, is that when you develop as a spiritual person, that they have the feeling you're not like them.
Right.
And by brushing your teeth next to them in the bathroom, you brush them very similarly as they do, I guess. I think that's what it comes down to.
Maybe we brush our teeth differently.
I know what you mean. I mean, there's a tendency for people to put teachers up on a pedestal, and that creates a problem in which you feel like, well, I could never be like them, and they're not like me, and there's this sort of hierarchy that gets built unnaturally. And, sometimes teachers get so big that it's hard for them to mingle like that. For instance, Amma, the hugging saint, she's got this huge, millions of people worldwide following. But she gets down in the mud. I mean, when there's something to be built in her ashram, she'll get out there and haul sandbags. And, there was one story where she jumped into an open sewer to clear feces out of a sewer pipe with her bare hands because no one else would do it. And, they set up a bucket brigade until the thing got cleared. So, I think sometimes teachers do try to set an example, even if they can't sort of mingle to that extent all the time without getting mobbed day in and day out and never have a moment's rest. They at least try to demonstrate that ultimately, essentially, we're all one.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Go ahead.
Oh, so what I was going to do was give you the opportunity, if you will, to kind of lay out these stages of progression that you discuss in Follow Your Heart. And I don't know if we have time to get into it, but there was a beautiful interpretation of the labyrinth in the book also, which I thought was fascinating, how if you follow the labyrinth, sometimes you come very close to the center, but then you actually have to go out again and come around and then back again, and it's this sort of integrative process, or you think you're almost there, but then you have to go way out to integrate something that you hadn't integrated, and so perhaps we could weave that into the discussion as well. But perhaps maybe we could start by there are different models and different ways people could explain stages of progression to higher development. And I myself was a meditation teacher for many years. And one thing I just want to throw in before you start is that as a meditation teacher, I spent years being very good at talking about stages of development which I actually had not yet experienced. And I later sort of realized I don't want to do that anymore. I just want to speak from my experience, to whatever extent it's developed, or at least make it very clear that I'm speculating if that's what I'm doing. That I am discussing something I haven't yet experienced. So perhaps in laying out these stages, if you don't mind getting a little personal, you could also tell us to what extent this is your own experience, or to what extent you're parroting something your teacher has taught you.
I love that about you, Rick. You're really honest, and that's amazing. That's wonderful. That's because, as you say, it's so interesting to talk about these wonderful states, and it's so fascinating. And then a person can easily go beyond their experience and just into realms of I read this and I heard this, and what's the point of that?
Yeah.
We have books for that. Human beings are for this direct transmission from person to person of real experience. Now, those books, that book that we wrote, it's called Follow Your Heart. It lays out the steps of the path to illumination. This is something that we've experienced ourselves personally, even further stages than those, and that we have experienced in our students. We've seen our students go through those steps. And our promise as a school is that we can take a student through those 9 steps. That's our contract with our students.
In a particular time span, or what?
Well, faster than it happened for us.
Okay.
That's the hope of every teacher, is that their students have less of a difficulty than they had. And we've seen it happen in 10 years. We've seen it, depends on at what point people find us, what step are they on when they find us,
That's right.
Step 7 in the path we call enlightenment. And then we've identified step 9. And of course, this whole map, by the way, this is not ours. I mean, the conception of that is something we inherited, but the experience of it is ours. And the ability to recognize people in those steps requires remembering. It requires remembering, oh, I see in you something I remember going through. So one has to have the direct experience. to be able to recognize it in others.
The other thing about this map that we describe in there is it's really a map of the path of life. You see, life itself pushes you through steps, if you like it or not. But what our experience is that certain steps on the path of life, you won't get further on. So when we wrote this book, we went on tour with it, and I remember having met a man who came to me afterwards, and he said, "Susanna, thank you so much for coming here to this little town." He says, "I have been on this particular step for 27 years and didn't know there was a further step." He says, "And I have been on antidepressant and in treatment heavily because I didn't know that this was a so-called spiritual step and that one can go further with it." So certain steps you need a teacher or a guide or somebody who has broken through. And this is what I mean with mankind or with humankind at this point. I'm sorry that I'm so insistent on this topic, but this is what I have the feeling. Mankind is at a certain step, and mankind is breaking through as a whole to this new step, and that's where our responsibility is. But let's go back and talk about these steps as we describe them. There wasn't one more thing that I wanted to say in general about it. So life, I don't know, it probably comes again. I think when we listen to each other, it will come.
Yeah.
So the first step, Rick, is a very simple one, and people are being challenged in life to that, and that is making a commitment. You know, can you make a commitment? And that's like on all different levels, you know, like to another person, but can you pay a mortgage? Can you make a commitment to a job? So that's how you see that it is in life. A more difficult step is, can you make a commitment to a path? See, this is what we experience too. So you can go in your life, you can come to step 4, 5, 6, even 6. Some people go even further. But when they start making a commitment to a spiritual path, they go through all these steps again. I think that's the other thing I wanted to say. So
I guess two questions that come up is, how do you determine whether the path is worthy of committing to? And another question might be, might there come a time when it would be advisable to break that commitment because the path has outlived its usefulness?
That's right.
Yeah, we say that not every path that comes down off the mountain from the spring at the top reaches the ocean.
Right.
Sometimes a river will dry up midstream, and so not every path leads to the end. And sometimes you have to then, what water does was when it comes down the hill and doesn't go any further, it evaporates and reprecipitates, and you try another path.
And I've seen people who have become dilettantes, who just like skip from one thing to another without really getting into it. And I've seen others who maybe stay in a path to the point where they're just all dried up. There's no inspiration. You know, they're just kind of routinely doing the same thing without getting anything out of it. And I've seen others who give something its full shot for maybe even couple of decades, and then realize, all right, I've done it with this. Now I'm going to switch into something else.
Absolutely, we get a lot of those people because there's, a teacher can't make all this stuff up in one lifetime. It's the complexities of the unity state are so great, and it's so hard to conceptualize and to live. You have to stand on the backs of people that have gone before. So to look at these 9 steps in a broad brush, there's 3 groups. So we call them 3 stages of 3 steps each. And you can identify the stages pretty clearly in people's behaviors. So the first stage is about being separate from each other. The second is about being connected to each other. And the third is about being unified, in unity with each other. When you look at a person's behavior, you can kind of sense, let's say, it's not you can kind of sense, are they behaving as if their impact on another didn't affect themselves, right? I mean, like if you do something to somebody else, it's going to affect you back, but not everybody sees that. So that would be stage one.
Right, an obvious example would be people who commit crimes, go rob a convenience store, but obviously there are more sophisticated crimes, and even social and political and economic policies that are very harmful to lots of people, but they may serve the stockholders, and so they seem justifiable.
Exactly.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
And for the second stage, where we feel connected to each other, it requires the opening of the heart, because that's how we feel connected. The mind isn't connected, but the heart feels each other. And whereas the mind is built to see the difference between people, the heart is built to feel the similarity. So with the heart, we feel you're just like me in some way, and naturally, then I have to treat you in a way that's going to be good for you because it's going to be good for me. I'm going to feel good if I treat you well.
Mm-hmm.
And
just to interject, I mean, Susanna was talking earlier about the whole society evolving just the way an individual evolves. I mean, look at, for instance, race relations and where the South was 30, 40 years ago with, official segregation. And these days, most of the southern cities have black mayors and everybody's good friends. And, the way, it had been several decades before is just so alien to what it is now. So there's been this evolution.
That's why we think that our society as a whole is moving in from this first stage to the second stage.
Right.
Which is the first three steps into the next three steps.
Okay.
And that's because you see all over the place. You see heart. I mean, even in business consultants, they talk about heart and feelings and consideration and the deeper concerns, not the immediate quarterly returns. And so it's happening. We're just happy to be a little part of it, somebody who can talk about what this process is that's happening. It's a process of the world discovering its heart.
But I think that if a smaller group of people go through the details of these steps, that's what kicks in the whole. And a small group of people feels it. That person who came to me and talked, who went through deep depressions. There are certain people in this society who go through deep depressions. A lot of them don't. Why don't they? So there are certain hearts who really feel it, and I think those hearts, they took on this work to lift the whole.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm right about this, but that's how it feels.
Well, in the physical heart, about 1% of the cells are called pacemaker cells, and they actually regulate the beating of the entire heart. So only a small percentage of the cells have to be sort of functioning in synchrony for the whole heart to function properly. So what you're suggesting is that a tiny minority of society might undergo a significant shift, and that's going to bring the whole society into alignment.
That's right.
Maybe this is the time to talk about the Cleveland experiment.
Yep.
Okay, Cleveland.
You know that in 1993, the TM group did an experiment on Washington, D.C., where they reduced crime.
I was there.
You were there?
You were there?
Yeah.
Come on, tell us about it. We never met anybody who was really there.
Oh, it was hot.
It was hot?
Yeah, it was like 100 degrees. And we were scattered all over the city in different facilities. And I was in a bigger one, actually, here in Iowa, where we had 8,000 people in one building meditating together. And that was really profound. But anyway, so
8,000 people.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was.
I love the numbers that TM is able to produce.
It was profound. Imagine being in a group of 8,000 people all doing a 2-hour meditation routine together. You could cut it with a knife. It was so thick. But in any case, this thing in D.C., and I didn't mean to throw you off your game.
No, I'm going to get there.
So all I was aware of as a participant was, we were just doing our twice daily routine together in groups, and there was no one facility large enough so that some of us were in this college and some of us were in this hotel, and scattered about the city with half a dozen different groups, and it was nice, and we went on for a couple weeks like that. But then all these sort of sociologists and statisticians and so on were working in collaboration with the police department, collecting statistics on crime and correlating it with other variables such as weather and so on, where ordinarily hot weather would actually result in an increase in crime because people all get hot-tempered, literally. But they found that there was a statistical reduction in crime during that 2-week period, which eventually reverted back to normal after we left. And we did another one where I was in Iran, and we had groups in Central America, Southern Africa, the Middle East, Iran, and Thailand, because there were sort of trouble spots at those times. It was like when the Shah was about to leave, and things were crazy in Iran. And again, they found reductions in violence and social unrest, war deaths and stuff. And the principle of it. And, some people have criticized the research and said that it's just a PR stunt and that they're just, it wouldn't hold up. But some of it was published in peer-reviewed scientific journals. But the principle of it was that consciousness is a field, and if you enliven that field, then that enlivenment doesn't just take place in the room where you're sitting, it takes place throughout the entire vicinity and results in an upsurge or an upwelling of coherence and orderliness in the entire environment, which ends up impacting people's behavior, unbeknownst to them, but there's just a sort of a general, and of course there are always variations to any generality, but the general trend was for greater orderliness and coherence, reduced violence and conflict and so on. So that's it.
But I just wanted to know, do you have an explanation for this? Because according to my understanding, I had 2 roommates who did TM. Mm-hmm. And according to my understanding, when you do TM, you leave your body.
I never have.
You never have?
No.
So, but you really make your breathing very slight.
That's a side effect. You don't make it slight, but it's like when you go to sleep at night, your heart rate and your breath rate and all those reduce because you're in a rested state. So the mind and body are correlated, and if the mind settles down to a much quieter level of functioning, the body is going to settle down along with it. The two are connected. So that's all that happens. The mind settles down, but you haven't left your body. It's more of an integrative state rather than a dissociative one.
I see.
Yeah.
And how many people were in your experiment in Washington, D.C.?
Oh, I think about 3,000, something like that.
Uh-huh. All right, so I'll tell you about our experiment with Cleveland. We had a friend in Cleveland, and she's the number 2 person in the, what's it called? The
United Way.
United Way. Mm-hmm. So she's very plugged into the community, and she said, can you do anything to help us? Cleveland is one of the most economically depressed cities in America.
Yeah.
Which I thought was a title reserved for someplace in Alabama or something, but no, it's in Cleveland.
They lost a lot of the auto industry that they used to have there. Yeah.
Exactly. There are blocks and blocks of houses that are vacant. Mm-hmm. So a really interesting thing about Cleveland is that the police department there is up to date, and they put on their website every single crime in a database. You can search it and you can download it. So, and the data that they provide indicates time of day, date, time of type of crime, details about where it occurred. All right, so we have the data, see, and that's what back in 1993 you didn't have that advantage in Washington. And I could download that, and I'm a computer scientist by trade, so I can download all that data and build a database out of it and analyze it. All right, so then we took on the project to meditate about Cleveland from Tucson. We're about 2,000 miles, almost exactly 2,000 miles from Cleveland. And so there was our friend in Cleveland, and then the 2 of us here in Tucson. We meditated at 3 a.m., which was 6 a.m. Cleveland time, 3 days a week. And 4 days a week we did not meditate. And then we varied the days to avoid day of week bias. We did this for 3 months. And then we looked at the data for the days we meditated versus the days we didn't meditate. Now see, what you did in Washington, it was a little different protocol. You were meditating every day, and then you compared the data to a year ago, and then compensated for things like employment rate and weather and so on. We didn't do that because the factors are on a short term or less critical. I mean, so we just looked at what was the crime like on the days we meditated versus the days we didn't, within the same week, right? And
we had a fourth person involved who called us on what days to meditate. So it wasn't like every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday we meditated.
Right.
It was randomized.
It was randomized by a fourth person. And so, analyzing all this data, we had 100,000 crimes that we could analyze in 3 months. We found that the effect was much greater for the next 6 hours after we meditated. So from 6 a.m. Cleveland time to noon, we had the most effect, and then there was an effect over the 24 hours from that. So within the first 6 hours, violent crime decreased 34%. Mm. Over the next 24 hours, it was down 19%. Mm-hmm. Violent crime, compared to the days that we didn't meditate at all, and that's 3 people. See? The way we did it is also different from what you described in the Washington experiment, because we weren't working on the ground of being, raising the ground of being, energizing the platform on which human consciousness is built. Right? What we did was we said we want to think of Cleveland, and we want to bring Cleveland here. Also, we weren't considering sending energy from Tucson to Cleveland, because by the square of the distance law, there wouldn't be much left, right? So what we did instead was to think we want to absorb Cleveland and bring it into our bodies, so that the effect is then local. Cleveland is here, and I can have a very powerful effect on Cleveland if it's in me. See? And that means that then all that was happening emotionally, violently, in joy and in bliss, everything that was going on, all those emotions in Cleveland were happening inside us. And then our job was to process those emotions, integrate them, work them out together, bring an integration and a peace to the inner experience we were having, which was then reflected back upon Cleveland.
When you were functioning that way as a kind of a washing machine for Cleveland, did you feel, did you literally feel like a lot of garbage that was going on, the drug addicts and the rapists and the murderers and all? Did you feel like you were sort of taking that all in and purifying it?
Yeah. All that emotion, that despair, mm-hmm. that anger, but at the same time also the joy of people having babies and the joy of people making love, and all that's in there too, right? Mm-hmm. And it's just that in Cleveland they're separated. Mm-hmm. This person's feeling this and this person's feeling that, but if you can bring it together into one heart, then that mixes and everything becomes different. Mm-hmm. And in that integration, there is less violence. There is more harmony, right? Mm-hmm. And so people act more harmoniously.
I did not experience detailed emotion when I did the practice. We do this practice too one-on-one, like as partner exercises or with smaller groups. When I do the practice with a partner, with one person, to sort of assess the state, or what step on the path would they be on, or what archetype they are. I can feel when somebody has an earache. I can pick that up. They don't tell me I have an earache, but I can say, wow, your left ear is really hurting. Or I can say, something what people might call medical intuitives. I cannot say their whole medical history or so on, but I can say certain things I pick up. With the Cleveland experiment, which I was part of, I cannot say that I was like even in a heightened emotional state. It was just very, very overwhelming energetically. That's how it felt more. I couldn't, for me it was hard to say, was I in Cleveland, like was that energy around me or was I in it? I could have not differentiated.
Yeah. That's very interesting
it's
though.
More like that, it's like a very, very strong vibrating energy. That's how it felt.
Yeah. Well, having participated in experiments like this myself, as I was saying, I fully believe that this is possible, this kind of thing. And it's sort of a hint at how we might undergo really profound and wide-sweeping social change if even a relatively small percentage of people undergo sufficient development.
Yeah, I liked what you said about the heart. It only takes a few cells to control the rhythm of the heart, which then controls the rhythm of the whole body.
Right, right.
And even beyond the body, because the magnetic field pulses when the heart pulses, and that goes straight out into the room.
So,
the environment. And only a few cells really doing the work.
Yep.
So
there are a number of other examples like that from physics and biology too. That's just an example, but there are numerous examples where in lasers and magnets, various things where just a small percentage, sometimes even the square root of 1%, is sufficient to shift the behavior of the entire system.
Yes, that square root of 1% is a number that the TM people use a lot.
Yeah.
And we wanted to know, what could one or two people do?
Right.
Because those are the people we can directly connect with, and so this is the work of our school, is to train people to be able to do that in their own community, in their own family. Start with their family, and see if they can have an effect on harmonizing the whole family, so that people get along better in a measurable way, really emotionally significant, and then extend that to the group, to a larger group.
So we were talking about these stages, and there were 3 groups of 3, and we were going through the first group, and it was like every man for himself, and then the heart wakes up, and then more of a unity thing, as I recall. And somehow that inspired this discussion about Cleveland and everything. So maybe we could sort of put that back into context and then take it from there.
Well, in the second stage, when the heart opens and becomes accessible, this enormous power develops in people. So we see a lot of really successful people are using their hearts. I mean, business people use their hearts. People that, sports people that follow their passion, they're using their heart, And it gets to a certain point. And so the first 5 steps out of these 9 are about personal development. And then step 6 hits, and that's when it starts to unravel. It's the dark night of the soul.
See, Rick wanted to hear a lot about personal stories.
We have personal stories about each one of these steps, because we can remember, going through each of these steps, sometimes multiple times, sometimes for years and years, right? Because we weren't so familiar with these steps in the days that we went through them.
When I personally came to making a commitment to the path, according to my understanding of the path, which is looking at it retroactive, was at the stage 6. And we find a lot of people, not all, but a lot of people come to the spiritual path on stage 6.
And what is stage 6? You mentioned 1, 2, 3, but you haven't mentioned 4, 5, 6.
No.
Well, let's go back.
This is where I'm going to get to, So
okay.
Stage 1 is making a commitment. Stage 2 is testing it. And stage 3 is feeling very comfortable with it. So I went through those steps in my life, right? I could make commitments to a relationship. I could make commitments to work. I could, earn my money, and I could, so all these things I could do. And I had even challenged myself in my personal life, to heart openings, to go, because this would be step 4, 5, and 6. Step 4 is like that your heart opens. And I think I experienced this in personal relationships, in particular with my sister, who had been in a monastery and was asked to leave the monastery because of mental illness. And that sort of ripped my heart, because I really tried to help her, and I was not successful in helping her. And that sort of leaves your heart in a state, of being undone, being ripped open and undone, and where you have more the feeling, wow, there must be more to it. And but I felt on a personal level of not being able to take care of this, or not ever being able to take care of this. So I left that situation, and I said to myself, well, I have to take more care of myself. And I was back then in the theater business, and I was able to be quite successful in that work. And what was interesting to me about it was that it didn't create any inner satisfaction. And that is what brought me to this step 6, similar to with my sister. I left that. I could not bring that to a successful state, but the theater was a rather successful state, and that is what created for me the step towards the spiritual path, where I had the feeling there must be more to life. And especially it was that intense in my personal life that I had been, because of my theater work, because you have to always give an outer face to your inner experiences. I said, well, I'm searching for a teacher, and so I studied with Lee Strasberg and Stella Adler, but it created no satisfaction whatsoever. And that's how I found then my spiritual teacher. Mm-hmm. And I had to make a commitment. See, here I'm at step 1 again. Do you see how I'm...
Right.
And the difficulty for me was now, am I that needy, that I'm committing myself to a cult? Those are the mental stages again. Do you see? Mm-hmm. Although I had gone internally through so much outwardly, by being confronted, committing myself to a teacher, my mind is being full-blown back and saying, wow, now you're committing to yourself where a lot of your friends and a lot of other people have told you, now you're hitting really low, you're going to a cult, and who knows what a spiritual teacher is and all. You see, and that's a mental state, so I'm being back at step 1 on my spiritual step, and I'm going through testing with my spiritual teacher, who says to me, you are an incredible, evolved being. Do you know what I mean?
And was that the Sufi teacher?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
good.
Yeah. I never messed with any other path once I found that. I'm somebody who, when I commit, hopefully I commit. And so, but there you go then through testing, and I went through testing with my teacher, does he really see me? Does he really understand me? Will he really hold me? And that brings you then into step 3, where you're comfortable with the path. Yeah, this is my school, this is my path, this is my Sangha. And that went all very, very fast for me till I met this man, do you see? Because that sort of threw my whole life apart again in the spiritual school. Do you see?
Was that frowned upon or something, or just...
Heavily. He was married and I was married.
Oh, I see, yeah.
Having an affair in a spiritual school,
That's a no-no.
That's a no-no, and it should be a no-no, theoretically. Right. Theoretically, nobody should have an affair because you abandoned and hurt the one whom you love. Mm-hmm. And that's what opens up the heart. Again, on another level.
It's one of the things that opens the heart. There's other things.
But do you see how these stages,
they kind of loop around.
Well, it is just not completely, not like that. It only loops when you have gone through life. And this is what we experience with a lot of our people. They come to our school and it's assessing where are they. And then we can give them feedback oh, that's what you're going through. You're in step 5. You're very accomplished, and you see the abyss coming, and you don't want to go there. And then, if they commit themselves to the path, it starts with step 1. And that is, for a lot of people, a very, on the one hand, a peace-giving thing, but they have the feeling, now I'm in step 1 again, and I have gone through all this again. But everything is experienced new. I think a lot of spiritual paths describe that. And the skill is then to help to go through all the 9 steps and you go through this with the teacher, with this, what you call the Sangha, we just call it the community of the heart. And I have the feeling if you go through all these steps, then you start becoming useful.
And so then what, oh, I'm sorry, Puran, go ahead.
So you want to I could describe these steps a little bit.
More
Please.
theoretical?
Yeah.
It was so emotional.
That would be my job. The first 3 steps are about developing concentration. And you see a lot of people in life have developed concentration, because it's necessary to be successful. The ultimate step in concentration is to be able to focus on something so intensely that there's no distraction. Nothing else exists for that time.
I could learn that one a lot better.
Oh, we all could.
Yeah, I'm trying to work, and then some email comes in, and I go, oh, what's this?
But you have shown persistence and deliberation and consistency with this work that you're doing here on Saturday mornings.
True.
And you're very focused on it. And when you're here, you're not thinking about something else. You're right with us, right? So you're really focusing on us. And that's, so it's necessary to get to this point, but not everybody gets there. Some people still haven't learned concentration. And so there's a lot of spiritual schools that really focus on this step a lot, like focusing on a point on the wall, developing a mandala. There's lots of ways to do it. The next 3 steps are about emotional development, where we're learning how to do we call it contemplation. Contemplation is where the thing that you're focusing on, you actually become it. So, like you could concentrate on a plant, like if you're a gardener or you're taking care of house plants or something, you have to concentrate on what does that plant need. But in the next set of steps, you become the plant, and you can feel what it needs. And when the plant is dry, you feel thirsty. You see? It's not like you remember, oh, I missed my watering schedule. That's still an objective outsider. That's still steps 1, 2, 3. In steps 4, 5, and 6, you look at the plant and you feel thirsty. See? So that's a change in identity. And that's done through the heart. That's done by compassion. It's done by feeling. It's not thinking. And anybody who gets really good at something does it with their heart. I mean, golfers, CEOs.
But that's all very theoretical.
Right? They're using their heart because they're using their passion and their excitement. And so there's a step 4, which is this great awakening. Everything is now technicolor instead of black and white, and you see the beauty in things that you were missing, and the beauty in another person. You fall in love so easily, and you cry at movies, and this whole emotional experience. And then step 5 is the ability to develop that beauty in something where you see it's missing. See, in 4, you're able to discover the beauty that's there, but that actually then leads to a rather cynical experience where you blame people for not being the way you see they could be. Mm-hmm. How come you're not developing in your person? How come you're not acting like the beautiful person I see that you are? So we blame each other for not being as great as we see them. But in step 5, you learn that people could be great if you loved them more. It's up to us to create in another what we see in them. And that's a powerful thing. It's the power of the heart. And these 5 steps are self-development, and this is as far as one can go with one's own personal power.
It almost sounds like the Cleveland thing was a step 5 thing, because you kind of loved Cleveland in a sense, and that made Cleveland better.
It's true.
But didn't you want to have personal experiences?
You can throw them in there as you go along. Yeah, sure.
I had the feeling I went like so far, and Puran gives the theory.
Well, it's good to have both. The theory and then the concrete example to illustrate it.
Well, what did you want to say about?
No, I just felt like when I listen to you, I just get theory.
Yeah, but it helps me understand it also, because if you just I think both are like 2 steps in walking. You take your left step, your right step, and you keep walking along. So it's always good to have an abstract theory and then a concrete illustration, and then swing back and forth. So let's swing to the illustration.
Okay, illustrate.
No, you're going to illustrate. You have a story.
Well, I didn't. It's just sort of I felt that I made myself very vulnerable.
And
Do you know what I mean? I made myself very vulnerable in telling a very personal story, and I don't mind that. I do that often.
Sure.
And I do know the theory behind it. I just think it would be a more balanced presentation, if men become more vulnerable
I could do that too, yeah.
Instead of just, he has the theory and she's the example. Because, I go on the road on my own and teach, and I give the presentation and I give the examples.
She gives the theory too.
Yeah. And our path, and I think that's what I want to say too, is, we teach a lot together and develop this work together. It is a very vulnerable path, and our lives are very intertwined in that, because part of, what I just said, by me, actually he was the one who pushed for it, that we are together. I wouldn't have gone for this because it's such a big no-no in spiritual communities. And that brought us very much, now I'm talking, it brought me very much into developing this heart, because we became sort of outcasts in the community. And we believed, I at least, this is very interesting too, Rick, he pursued me like mad, where it was obviously to the community that this man has gone crazy about a woman. And I became the outcast, not he.
Because you were considered the temptress or some such thing. Maybe.
I have no clue as what I was considered as. I did nothing to this man. I was married and I had not the whatever. I don't want to defend myself because here I am with this man, and I'm very grateful for it. But the thing is like I became the outcast, and it did a lot to my heart. Do you know what I mean? And it brought me into this place internally. Do I want to go for this? And why do I want to go for this? And in which stage is my marriage? And what do I look for in life? And what is important to me? And how do I change all that, what I'm going through? How do I get control over it? And I did not have the support of a teacher or a friend. My husband was mad at me. I mean, I was, through the spiritual path, pushed into the dark night of the soul. And had to figure out on how to get through it. And this is why I was the one who speaks about the invincible heart. That is my topic, because the heart carried me through, my own heart, and which has the ability to become the one heart. That is the power of the heart. It is love, it is truth, it is sacredness, and trying to find peace. Those are the qualities of the heart. And that is a tremendous amount of power. And I think every everyday person knows those qualities. Love, truth, sacredness, and peace. So this is, and I said to myself, what is my bottom line? And those are the kinds of things that I had to count on, because I couldn't listen to friends, because this was a man who had 4 children. I mean, these are all things you don't mess with when you live from the heart, right? And we did. And how do you get through it? And so we, this story is 30 years old, so it's easy to talk about it after 30 years. And that is what allowed us to create this school of the heart, because we know the heart from inside out, and the power of it and what holds it together if things really fall apart. So, and this is what I think the world needs at this point, because it feels in lots of places the world really falls apart, and this is where you can go to. And this is where the step 7 comes in, where you feel the energy of the spirit. Do you see? And that is, where the heart, we say this is the step 3 in meditation, where the heart opens up to the one, to unity. And then the guidance becomes very strong, which is 8. And whenever I asked my heart, which way should I go, my heart always strongly said, go with this man. And there I had to address those fears very personally on what it takes, because what I all had to take on by making that step. Because so I moved in then with this man after some time, and then I had 4 children.
All of a sudden.
All of a sudden.
Yeah.
So, and that all shows you about the path of the heart. So the path of the heart is not something you imagine. So, and the voice of the heart is not something you imagine. It tells you do this, but then you have to create the strength to live the consequences of it. It has a consequence if you follow your heart. And most people hear the voice of their heart or hear inner voices, but they don't have the strength to follow them, because it's actually not always easy or glamorous or that. But one has the strength. One has the strength.
It's interesting. There's so many situations, and they're illustrated in so many myths and stories where people feel a calling to do a particular thing, and all of the social norms and the conventional wisdom says you shouldn't do that, but they, it's like the hero's quest kind of thing, where they follow that calling nonetheless, and then they end up, like even Jack and the Beanstalk. I mean, or like that movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where he had this feeling, I've got to, this pile of mashed potatoes means something. What is it trying to tell me? And everybody thinks he's going crazy, and he eventually gets to where the aliens land. It's like there's so many. It's like a theme that runs throughout the culture.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And so here we are, and that's what we said. So because I had spiritual experiences before that, and so he had this, and so what do we do with it? And that's how actually then this School of the Heart got created. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good. And so that was, I think you're delving now into the third set of steps by telling this story, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And how far have we gotten in these steps?
That's through what I meant, that this decision-making process to sort of dissolve my marriage and go with Puran, that was for me the dark night of the soul on the spiritual path. Because it really challenged, I had the feeling I was stepping off a cliff, because that's the feeling. My relationship with my husband was sort of safe. It was not as deep or as spiritual as this relationship then had become. And it was the sense of, too, that if I go this path, that I can fulfill the purpose of my life.
Right. But you didn't want to do any harm, obviously. Well, go ahead.
See, that is, I think, the challenge often that we don't understand, and what I had to look at, how does my former husband feel about it, and how does it affect all the people, the 4 children, and I had a child by then, and the former wife. So there's a lot of consideration that we knew that we had to go through by making this happen. And so it was the first, I don't know, 10 years of us being together, all was mending relationships.
Yeah.
You know, with the children and the former spouses, and we needed 7 years that we knew each other, that we got married finally.
We made a big mess, and we had to spend a lot of time working on that mess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is a lot of that sixth state, you know. So it wasn't like we met and we were happy ever after. I mean, we were not unhappy, but it needed a lot of mending, and that is work of heart.
And of course, a lot of people make that kind of shift and then realize that it was a mistake, you know, or they're just chasing they're chasing after that excitement that you feel at the beginning of a relationship, and they don't, you know, several years into their marriage, they no longer feel it, so they think, oh, I got to go find it again somewhere else, and they go through 6 or 7 of those. You know, so that's what you're doing. Obviously, is to be distinguished from something more superficial. What you did.
Well,
Yes.
we were each happily married, and
Happily.
I think so.
Well,
It's just that there is a person in the world. Conceptually, say I believe there's such a thing as a soulmate, and it's a different kind of relationship altogether. It's not a relationship of harmony and wonder, and so it's bigger than anything I had ever imagined. I thought I was with the person I would be with all my life, my ex-wife, but Susanna just blew that idea apart. I mean, I could not avoid it. I could not reject it. It was so compelling, the experience of being with Susanna. And then, as we say, you make a commitment, and then you have to have it tested. Everything has to be tested. So I had to live. We had to live apart for 3 years before we could get together, and I think that was a wonderful testing time, because, as you say, there's this temptation to just chase the high. We had years of real despair. Would we ever get together? And we couldn't talk to each other. We couldn't communicate, and we held this ideal of being together through meditation. I mean, I would meditate, and I would be with Susanna in meditation. And I wasn't looking for it. I wasn't trying to make it happen. It was just, that's what would happen every time. And so when you have those kinds of experiences, then you try to make them real, you know. But what step 6 is about is this first step beyond the personal development, where you realize that everything that has made you successful in steps 1 through 5 has actually been a special case rather than a general case. So one has become really good at something, like one runs a company and has gotten very wealthy, but that doesn't necessarily mean you can do other things like hold a relationship together. There's different skills, right? And so a part of a person has become specialized and really advanced, but in order to go further, you realize then that the very thing that I've relied upon is also my crutch. My greatness, my well-developed parts are actually holding me back from experiencing the other parts of myself, because I rely on this part so much. And the invisible potentials of myself don't get a chance to get explored, because I'm always in my habit of being who I think I am, you know? And so as the sense of self begins to enlarge, it actually kind of falls apart, because I no longer have that specific identity that I thought was me. My identity is getting bigger, and the rest of this I don't know. I don't know the rest of this person. And so there's an existential challenge to one's paradigm, the whole sense of reality that we have, how things work, who I think I am, my relationship to God. It's all changing. It's crumbling underneath my feet. And we have to go through that. We have to walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And it's only the shadow of death. right? Like it says in the Bible. It's
Right.
not death, it's the shadow of death. But you have to walk through that valley and find somebody's hand, thou art with me, so you can get through it. And so this is where a lot of people discover their teacher. As Susanna said, we have a lot of people come to us in this step. They've done everything they think they can do. And that's where I was when I met my teacher. I said to I was at the top of my game in computer science research. I was a very far end, far out, futuristic computer researcher at a computer lab that was, I don't know, way ahead of its time. And I found my teacher, and he said, "What do you want?" And I said, "I want to die to everything that I am. I don't want to be who I am anymore. I want to be what I think is possible, which I don't understand." And he said, "Well, you're asking for a lot." And I said, "Well, can you give me just even a taste of what a human being can be?" And then that's when, in the Hindu philosophy, that's when Krishna opens up to Arjuna and shows him the glory of his being, and Arjuna is like wiped out at this.
Yeah, it's like too much. Take it away again.
So step 7 is very hard to integrate because it's the experience of reality with no lens. And it's very hard to integrate. It's hard to be there and also do the dishes and pay the mortgage and all that. It's a real challenge.
And integrate is the key word there, because it can be done, but it has to be integrated.
It can be done. But for a long time, one is bewildered, in awe, and meditation is just an incredible experience. It's just like, it's better than drugs, but so then eventually one learns to work with that experience. And so that's the next step, where you begin to communicate with it. You're not just being bombarded by the universe, you can talk to the universe and get answers back. So a relationship that's workable, a workable relationship develops with the universe. You can interact. You can get information. You can get specific answers. You know how to, let's say, it begins to work for you. It's not just overwhelming you. And that's step 8. And step 9 is very interesting because in step 9, this experience of the light of the spirit within one becomes so strong it actually creates physical light in the heart. Physical, measurable light. So
that you perceive with your inner vision, so to speak?
You can count it with it's measurable with a photon counter.
Huh. So if you put a person in a dark room, you'd be able to actually detect photons emanating from the heart.
I did that.
Uh-huh.
The threshold of visibility is 1,000 photons a second. Mm-hmm. And of course, a photon, as you know, is like an electron. It's tiny.
Right.
So 1,000 of these a second is like no light at all, basically.
Right.
But still, the eye can perceive that as visible. Mm-hmm. I could make 100,000 photons a second. So that's 2 orders of magnitude beyond visibility. And that was coming out of my chest. And that was being counted with a photon counter. Mm-hmm. So this is illumination. This is the ability to light the way.
Is it subtle light, like an aura, which others might not be able to see, or is it more something that even a person without subtle perception would be able to see?
Yeah, you can see it. It's 2 orders of magnitude beyond visible.
Okay, with real photons.
Real photons. That's right. These are not metaphysical photons. These are real photons. And
no, he did that experiment in Germany. He was in a dark room, a man outside his photon counter. He had no clothes on, to have no fluorescent on there. Mm-hmm. Well, the interesting part of it, tell the interesting part of it.
Well, I had this opportunity to work with this guy who had a photon counter, which is an expensive device. And it's liquid helium cooled, so it's a fragile device, right? Mm-hmm. And so it takes a big setup, and it takes a laboratory and all this stuff. And this guy, a friend of mine, student of mine actually, had such a setup because he was doing some research on plants. And he was investigating whether organically fed plants produce more or less light than regular plants. So he had this machine. So I was there to do a seminar, and so the opportunity arose. And I was in the lab with him all day on a Saturday. I spent the whole day trying to make light come out of my chest. I know lots of practices. I know Kundalini Yoga. I know the Hierophant practice from the Egyptians, on and on and on. And I could get bursts of light, but I couldn't sustain it. And so I got really worn out, and I went back. I was staying with him overnight, and went back to his house, and we found that his son was sick. So he went to deal with his son, and I went to bed. And I woke up early in the morning with a realization of how to do it. And I said, let's run to the lab. We went to the lab. It took a couple of hours to get the machine ready. Finally, it was ready, and the room was dark, 20 photon a second background count, which is really dark. And then I turned on the light. One way I did it was I imagined this sick boy, who was very real to me because I was staying with him. I'd seen the boy. I imagined this boy who was sick, who needed light. I imagined him in front of me. And his need pulled it out of me. See? I was able to make light to send to him because he needed it. It wasn't just an experiment anymore. It was, useful. And so this is what I learned about science experiments is you can't do them in cold blood. You need to have a reason to do it. The body responds, the psyche, the whole being responds to a need. And the need isn't, I want to see if I can make the instrument, The need is human to human. So ever since then we've been realizing the way to make yourself light up is to imagine sending light to somebody that needs light.
And at this point people might be wondering, so what? What's the purpose of this? Why should we make ourselves light up? And I think I could give an answer, but I'd rather hear yours.
Well, first of all, when that light, which is spirit, it's the light of spirit. When it comes into the mind, it makes the mind light up. It makes the mind brilliant. You get very, very creative. You get inspiration. In the body, it becomes vitality, right? But
as a side effect of helping others, you become enlightened.
But it gives you this incredible courage. This sense that when you know that you're walking around with a lamp in your chest, you have a different life. You're not afraid of darkness. You're not afraid of death and dying and illness and not being well liked and lots and lots of stuff. People walk around in a lot of fear, and there's just no fear when you know that you're sending out light.
It reminds me of that Bible verse, when your eye is single, your whole body shall be filled with light.
Yeah. Yeah.
Eye is single. So did we reach stage 9, or was that 8?
That was 9.
Okay, good. So
these
go ahead.
These are the 9 steps of the spiritual path which we commit to for a student. Our job is, when we take on a student, we say, your path is no longer your own. We're there too. You now have a companion on your path, and you have your responsibility, but we share that responsibility. And if you're not making progress, it's as much our fault as your fault. Now, having reached that 9th step, now, as Susanna says, we're ready for service. Now we're ready to help. We're not helping out of need. We're not helping out of curiosity and how do things work? What kind of effect can we have on life? We're over that. We're ready to serve because that's what we do, not because it makes us feel good or because we get recognition, it's just because that's what people do. And now there are 9 more steps.
9 more steps? Oh, okay.
Steps of service.
Steps of service,
They're not steps of development anymore. And the 9th one of that second group of 9 steps is the Christ consciousness. So that's where it goes, or Buddha consciousness.
And so would you say that, so these 9 steps of service, which we probably don't have time to elaborate, but service becomes a path, and that path facilitates your evolution. I'm just sort of summarizing, and leads to what you say, Christ consciousness or Buddha consciousness or enlightenment or whatever.
Yeah, this part of the path is all about your sphere of influence. how can you help humanity evolve? How can you transmit light and consciousness and energy to other people and lift their? And there's a stage on this path of the teacher, which is these 9 steps of service. There's a stage in there where you can communicate a technique. Now that's early, but there's a later step where you can actually transmit an experience. Mm-hmm. And you can do that through a glance. You don't have to use the technique anymore.
Right.
You know, it's beyond the technique. And there's even a state where you can raise a person in realization in a way that is lasting. It's not just at the moment. That you can actually make a person evolve through your presence.
Yep. Amma, the hugging saint, is coming here in 2 days, and she's a nice example of that. You know, she's just having these brief interactions with person after person after person after person, thousands of them, and yet there's this really significant shift that takes place for, I'd say, everybody, although not everyone is aware of it to the same extent, and maybe it's the degree of shift is different according to one's receptivity, but you know, she's like this kind of generator that is charging up all the little batteries. Yeah.
That's right. But one needs to be prepared, so I do think humankind can be prepared for that, and I think life on this planet would look very, very different.
Yeah.
A lot of stress that we experience now could just be absorbed and go away, and a lot of fear. You know, I do think what in this hemisphere we experience so strongly is fear, and we sort of would need some beings who vacuum up all the fear in us.
Yeah.
So those are the engagements on the higher levels.
This is one of the roles of a teacher, is to absorb the karma of the student.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if you take a scoop of mud and try to dump it into a glass of water, that glass of water can't really absorb it. But if you take that same scoop and throw it in an ocean,
it's
just dissolves. So you have to be an ocean.
Yeah, because what you hear so often from people say, you know, he or she, they really have a good heart. Their intentions were good. They are really wonderful people, but, and I think if that can be lifted and transformed, then you have the person with the good heart, and we don't have to fill our prisons with all these people who are actually innocent. They're all innocent in their deep beings, and we're just wasting lots of energies and monies.
Yeah.
So I think that's the future of it, but that's just, a lot of work ahead of us.
But it's a fun job. It's not an onerous task, you know?
Yeah.
It's a privilege, let's put it that way. I don't know that it's always fun, you know. I find it's sometimes hard work.
Yeah.
You know, when you travel through the time zones, and it's just, sometimes it gets to you, but I think it's an honor to do it. I think more as that.
Our hearts ache.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But fortunately, we have the resources to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the things that made you upset when you were a child don't make you upset anymore, and now we get upset over other things, bigger things.
I think in your book you quoted the St. Francis prayer, you know, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. And I think you did. And so what you're saying here is that at a certain stage of your development, you become an instrument. That's your primary sort of function or orientation. You're not living for yourself merely, but rather you become a fit instrument, to use the word again, for a larger purpose, which you cannot really effectively have been 30 years ago. You know, when you were in the peace movement and all that stuff, you were doing your best, but there was too much sort of isolation and individuation to really.
That's right.
Yeah.
I didn't know enough. You know, when I was in the peace movement, I was very idealistic. I'm still very idealistic, but I didn't understand enough about how things got to be the way that they are. I think one needs to really have a deep understanding of why things are the way they are before we can change them.
Yeah.
And I didn't appreciate that there were, what the forces were that created the world we had, that we have now. This, I mean, I worked for some years in the financial industry, and specifically in a firm that developed the mutual fund, first mutual fund 100 years ago. And I discovered that mutual funds are sold, they're not sold on the basis of service or which was originally the intention. They're sold on the basis of fear and greed. And the marketing is very clear. In fact, the whole way the mutual fund company runs is it's all about fear and greed. And
So
one has to understand that in order to change it. You know, why are mutual funds why is that such a big business? It's because there's a lot of fear and greed in the world.
But it is actually, you know, Rick, the reason why that is because the world wants to stay on step 3. Step 3 is harmony, where you don't have to worry and you just are taken care of. And it's, when you look at our chart in the book, step 3 is a very long step, and 4 is the heart opening, and this is where the brink of the world is. And it's the end of mutual funds. You see?
Well, it's a good thing I don't have any.
You know what I mean with that metaphor? Because I'm like, why do we talk about mutual funds? And it's just because it's the end of that world.
Yeah, so mutual funds is just a case in point, and there are all sorts of things which are symptomatic of a stage 3 mentality in the world. And what you're saying is that we're moving into a new stage, and perhaps a lot of these symptoms are going to shift, you know, kind of tumultuously, perhaps, as the whole deeper shift takes place.
Yeah, and you see that in the movie Thrive, in the Thrive movie that you pointed to, which is a beautiful example.
Yeah.
Where at least that came out.
And that's where we need people, you know, evolved beings and a cooperation of spiritual beings, you know, to hold and live, because it's not easy to go through that step, having experienced it personally.
Yeah.
You know, it is an even step, it is a down step, and it's an important step, and it's full of feelings.
So I just wanted to mention that in our conversation here that the culmination of our work as teachers is the development of a university. We have an institute called the University of the Heart, which gives a 2-year graduate program. We give the equivalent of a master's degree. We're not yet accredited, but we will be. And it's a master's degree in heart studies, the application of the heart, how to use the heart to develop health, relationships, and accomplishments. And in these 2 years, we're packing in there what I learned in 20 years. Because it wasn't taught in an orderly system by our teacher. He didn't teach that way. He taught in a very sort of holistic way, but it was beautiful, but it wasn't organized like that. And so by organizing it and making it very clear, and using biofeedback and using objective tools, we can take people through a course of experience which would take really decades to go through on one's own.
See, and the reason we needed that long, create that university is because we have in the university retreat guides, we have web course teachers, we have mentors, we have, what is it called? People who hold that whole school together, and we had to train them all because the system that we're using these people in had to be trained through the heart. They had to go through those 9 steps.
Is the university decentralized and online, or is it something, a physical location?
It's 51% online.
Okay.
Because there's a special accrediting group that works with 51% online classes. And then there's 49% in person, either through group retreats, which are scattered around the country, and one in Europe. Also, private retreats. 7-day private retreat is necessary, part of the program, and a 12-day, once-a-year residency here in Tucson. So there's a lot of personal time with us and with other people that we've trained.
Group showers.
Maybe not.
It would be fun. Some fun, right?
Right. I didn't mean to throw in a frivolous point, but you had mentioned that earlier. So no, that's great. I really admire kind of, there's so many people who just sort of get up on a podium and talk and kind of relay their experience and go on to the next city, and everybody sort of gets what they can. But I think there's something laudable about practical application and trying to systematize and make it so that people can really own something, not just hear some words and perhaps get some upliftment, but really own it in their bones.
Yeah.
Well, this was wonderful, Rick. We have to go on. I have now to teach a class in our university. It just starts right now, and they're asking me.
Okay, well, let me just take 1 minute or less to just wrap it up, because I have to go too. And this is great, and people will know how to get in touch with you, because I'll put a link to your site on batgap.com, and as well as like a little bio about who you are and what you do, and links to your books and things. And also for those who've been listening or watching, if you go to batgap.com, you'll see all the other interviews I've done archived, about 180 of them so far, and a chat group that you can participate in to each week, several hundred posts about whatever has been discussed in the interview. There's a donate button, which I appreciate people clicking if they can, and you can sign up for an audio podcast if you'd like to listen on your iPod while you're commuting or whatever. And one more thing, email sign up if you'd like to be notified of future podcasts or whatever these are, future interviews. You'll be notified by email about once a week if you sign up for that. So that about covers it. Well, thanks.
Well, Rick, thank you so much.
You're
great fun.
You're terrific. I'm so happy. I'm so happy to be able to talk to you, because you understand what we're saying. You're just tremendously with it and inspired. I'm very happy for your work.
And in my eyes, you contribute to the
Thank
evolvement.
you for what you do.
You contribute to the evolvement of the whole. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks to those who've been listening or watching, and we'll see you next week.
Okay.
Yep.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye, Rick.
Bye.